When you're importing into yield data and you get to this page that has you select the season as well as the monitor name, the crop, and all of that, down here in the bottom right corner there's a crop settings button, and in that crop settings button, once you pick the crop that you want to work with for the season you want to work with, you'll notice that it always defaults to the auto calc or the auto calculate. Now it does not use these numbers, that's in there just from a previous time I've done importation of yield, but what it does do is it goes through and it will calculate based on what the spread of the data is, find the mean, go 2.5 standard deviations out from the mean, and clip off those data set that's beyond that. Now what it will do is a reiterative algorithm that will go through and find the best fit that it can based upon the spread of the data. So it may scooch out to the right, the high end of the tail, or the left, the low end of the tail, but at some point it's going to do a really reasonable job of clipping off any of those numerical outliers, and then it will clean that up from there. The manual option is just what you see right here. You could set your min yield, max yield, and anything below that. If it's 0, it's going to be 0, but anything below that would be 10. Anything above 350 would be ceilinged at 350. So your floor and your ceiling are 10 and 350 in this case. Allowable overlap would be yield data. Yield data is always polygon data, but we view it as point data. But the polygon data has area tied to it. So we calculate the area or the acreage of that particular area that was harvested out there on the field, and if there's a lot of those overlapping polygons where they kept the header down or whatever, then we will allow 80% at this point. If you trust the data is pretty good data and the guy did a pretty good job as far as harvesting, you might want to set that up. If you don't trust that, you may want to take that down quite a bit lower. And then of course the moisture and the test weight is based upon what we have derived from land-grant schools around the United States and around the world as far as university research on the different crops. Once the data is processed and you go in here, this is an example of a field that has multiple yield files embedded. So if I right mouse click on that yield layer, manage the yield data, and this pops up, you'll notice there's several here. And if I turn off the entire set of yield and go down through here, there's what was cut back on that particular day and date, that day and date, and you get the idea. So you can adjust this according to what you see. So if you come in here and you know that was cut by a machine that was quite calibrated, you could come down here and look at the average, and in this case in the view right now the average is 192.66. So if you didn't trust that this other data was calibrated off of a second machine, you could do this off the average and say I want to adjust everything else down to a 192.66. So if I typed in 192.66, that's going to adjust that back based upon what we know to be more accurate based upon the calibration of the monitor that was the better monitor as far as calibration goes. Now if we turn this on, our total bushels now have jumped up or have moved to 86.79, and you can adjust then off of what you have based upon a single monitor versus multiple monitors across the field. I would point out though that the field boundary drives everything in our system. The extent of that boundary, the accuracy of that boundary will clean up the yield data, and it will do all of the cleanup of the spatial outliers that you may have outside the boundary through waterways and all of that. So having the boundary accurate, number one, is the first critical and important foundational piece within our technology. And then after you have that set up as far as the boundary being spatially correct, then make sure you take the crop settings that I showed in the previous early part of the video and set that to what you want to clean up to the most accuracy you can off the incoming yield data. And then even after you've done that, you can come in here and right mouse click on the yield layer and clean up based on what you estimate to be the most valid numbers to choose to elect to be able to go in there and validate the yield data itself.